So to sum up here, good questions ask one thing. They don't ask two or more things. They have a clear means of answering. People know whether to check one or check all or write in their response, etc. And you can do this through both affordances and through actual writing in parentheses, for example. Check whichever one applies or most applies. They're carefully chosen so that users feel comfortable selecting them. People might be hesitant to reveal some facts about themselves, and it's important that we respect the privacy of our participants. So things like age or other demographic or personal information, income, for example, it might be best to give a range, and then people can at least they feel a little bit removed and a little more comfortable sharing that data. And it's in a carefully considered order. If you ask a very specific question, that might prime people for a general question later. And so you want to think about how you order different questions. One specific thing you might want to consider are closed versus open questions when writing a questionnaire. So here we have a couple different questions, and one of them is, my gender is. Is this closed or open? It's a closed question because they select from a drop-down menu. So there's a set of provided answers. This is an example from the user experience questionnaire, which is one of the typically used questionnaires for evaluating the user experience of a system. And if you click this, you have two options, male or female. What do you think about this? Do you see any problems? First of all, gender doesn't equal sex, so you have to have some nuance about these terms. So think critically about what you're asking, what the possible responses are. Gender is typically the identity or expression of someone, so men versus women or masculine or feminine expression. And sex is more biological. Now, these two terms are very related, and both of them are constructed. So, there are interrelations here, but you still want to think carefully about your terminology. And the second thing is, do people want to report this data? Is this a required question? What if I don't want to reveal that about myself? Finally, these things are often more complicated than a binary selection. So I wouldn't do this question for multiple reasons. You may have seen this before. This is the genderbread person, and it's a way of articulating the diversity and complexity of both gender identity and sexual orientation. Your identity, your expression, your sex, your gender, and your sexual orientation are all different concepts, and they can all vary on different spectrums. And there's increasingly literature talking about how this varies for individual people, and support for wanting to allow people to express themselves the way that they want to and only reveal what they want to reveal. There are other models. This one's a little more updated, the gender unicorn, that offers even more options to show how spectral, how many different spectrums are associated here. And my goal here isn't to dive deep into these concepts, but rather to illustrate that a lot of these questions that we sometimes think are very simple or take for granted are more complex. Gender is a very rich, complex part of human experience. So are things like race, age, and ability. But when we label and we bin constructs, we deal with generalities. We put people into bins of male and female or other bins that we may subscribe there. Same for race, same for ability. And those words can have meaning for people, and they might be things that people want to keep private. And we lose the individuals. So when you do the closed question, it does allow you to do more easily do quantitative data analysis. And there might be relevant categories that you analyze. But it also limits what data you're going to get from your participants, and it can be less respectful to them depending on the terminology that you use. So the best practice in HCI is simply have open questions for a lot of these concepts, like a text box or blank space for self-reporting gender and other rich constructs like that. That's not always feasible, and there may be a reason that you want to have closed questions for these concepts. So if necessary, there are recommendations for gender. I can point you towards this. There might be similar recommendations for other constructs like race and ability. And if so, I'm happy to discuss this more on the Microsoft team. So closed questions are most useful when you have a set of discrete options and you want to constrain the user. That is, to prevent errors, etc. When you use closed questions, you want to be sure that that's actually what the data type is and that you won't be causing harm by doing so. So something like what riding are you registered to vote in is modeled as a discrete, mutually exclusive set of options. This might effectively be modeled as a closed form solution. So for what riding you're registered to vote in, it might be good to give a closed form answer because then you prevent any errors. You have people just select something, they don't have to remember what it is. And it really is, the data type is one-to-one, right? Everyone should be registered in a single riding. That's the purpose of that construct. But with age, people might be more comfortable revealing only an age range, as we've talked about. So you can create bins. So when evaluating, you'll need to also consider things like what questions to ask, how many questions, how long it'll take people to complete their questionnaires, and how to administer. Online is probably the only feasible one right now, and allows you to reach a wide audience. If you do have an in-person study, a paper questionnaire often has a higher response rate because they're filling it out right there in person. And it's harder to say no to someone in person. And so, especially if you're doing that in an in-lab study, having a paper questionnaire gets you a better response often, and people often complete more of it. So, key takeaways from this lesson. There is a craft to creating good questionnaire questions and good questionnaires. You want them to ask one thing, each question to ask one thing. So the key takeaways from this lesson are there is a craft to creating good questionnaire questions and good questionnaires. You want each question to ask one thing. You want to have clear means of answering each question. You want to carefully choose the questions so that users feel comfortable selecting them. And you want to carefully consider the order of questions. You also want to consider when to use closed versus open questions. Closed questions can constrain the user, preventing errors and helping to structure data for analysis, but they limit options with rich constructs. So be able to critique and write questionnaires. That's it for this time. I'll see you next time.